Since the very beginning of this story, we are told and shown time and time again that Satoru Gojo is the strongest. His mere birth completely altered the landscape of Jujutsu society, shifting the power dynamic in favor of sorcerers. Every single loss our protagonists have suffered, every single death, is majorly due to a lack of Gojo's presence. His ceiling for over half the manga is exactly why JJK shifted so drastically in tone, becoming much darker and much more brutal. But now he's back, and so naturally you'd expect things to go back to how they were. But of course, it's not that simple. There is one massive obstacle Gojo must overcome before things can truly go back to how they were. The King of Curses, Ryomen Sukuna, in the body of none other than Megumi Fushiguro, the user of the Ten Shadows curse technique. And it's safe to say this will be the most monumental event in the entirety of JJK thus far, something not only the entire community will be seated for, but every character within the world of JJK who knows of its existence. There are hundreds of videos talking about this battle that is just around the corner. Thousands of people are discussing their expectations for this fight, from the power dynamics to the narrative implications. All eyes are open, and everybody is ready to feast on whatever it is Gege is cooking up for us. So I'm just going to say it flat out with no sugarcoating. I think Gojo is ultimately going to lose this battle. Whether that ends in his death or incapacitation again or anything really, a loss is guaranteed in my mind. But I don't want to tackle this from a power scaling perspective or even from a narrative perspective. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you why Gojo defeating Sukuna here, the ultimate villain of the story alongside Kenjaku, would not be a good way to wrap things up. So instead, I want to focus on what this battle will represent for the greater story being told. What Gojo vs Sukuna really means and what we should be looking out for in these upcoming chapters. I intend to illustrate just why this imminent battle is almost guaranteed to be the cathartic thematic clash that everything about JJK has always been building up to, specifically within the frame of the strongest. Are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest, or are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo? This is arguably the single most important line in the story concerning Gojo's character. It poses a moral conundrum regarding the rift between fate and free will. Is Gojo a moral agent, choosing to live his life the way he does, accommodating the position of a necessary figurehead for the power of Jujutsu sorcerers out of his own volition? Or is Gojo simply accommodating that position as a result of his fate, as a result of the abilities he was born with, the Limitless and the Six Eyes? Is Gojo just another necessary cog in the world of Jujutsu sorcerers that was placed there by design, or is he consciously choosing to live his life the way he does? Despite this inherent conflict being addressed in the flashback through Gojo's conversation with Yaga, it has never been properly resolved. In fact, the conflict has only grown with time, with the cog mentality for sorcerers coming out front and center in the narrative through its impact on Yuji. With regards to that conversation between Gojo and Geto, there is a counterpart to that all-important line that shows up right before Gojo was sealed. Rather than text, rather than a quote we can dissect, this counterpart exists as a visual. Immediately before Kenjaku or Geto's appearance in chapter 90, we get this page. A page that perfectly captures the principle of a picture speaking 1,000 words. Gojo gazes upon the eye of the prison realm, and in the place of his face, the defining aspect of an individual's identity, is a void, a black hole. This single visual speaks volumes for the character of Gojo. His identity as the strongest sorcerer shapes his entire existence, and in turn paves the way for a lack of self. Gojo is suffering as he lacks individual identity. If we really think about where the story goes after this moment, and I mean literally everything following his sealing, it has mostly been about rescuing Gojo, right? And why is that? It's not because he's a friend or a teacher or a loved one, but rather because he is the strongest, a necessary tool for the safety of Jujutsu society. A brutal fact, but a fact nonetheless. That is the main reason as to why Gojo needed to be freed. Gojo isn't really viewed as an individual, as a person, but rather he is reduced to his title as the strongest, somebody that can and needs to be used for the safety of the world, the most important and powerful cog in this society. And in his final moments, before being sealed, he finally comprehends that fact in what might be the most impressive page in this entire manga. And most notably, he comprehends that this position as the strongest has been compromised, as he is sealed into a box for what simultaneously felt like infinity and the blink of an eye. This lack of self, his identity being boiled down to simply the strongest, is something he only really realizes right before being sealed in the prison realm. And when he's finally freed, that identity, the strongest in the world, is no longer a certainty. Sukuna has returned and his existence challenges everything about Gojo's existence. I think this should be at the forefront of every reader's mind in anticipation for this fight between the strongest beings. For Gojo, this isn't just about saving the world, it's not just about freeing Megumi. This battle is about reclaiming his identity, his purpose, the title that practically shapes his existence. And in reality, it is a very sad truth for his character. If Gojo wins this battle, he goes back to being a cog in a machine. The lack of self isn't resolved, but rather reinforced, and that brings us to the second major premise of Gojo's character: to sow the seeds of a new generation who can not only match his unfathomable power, but potentially even one day surpass him. Time and time again, Gege has emphasized that Gojo's primary motivation is to garner strong allies who can aid him in maintaining Jujutsu society. He has never wanted to be the sole strongest sorcerer. This is why he turned to education to foster a new generation of sorcerers who can serve as strong and intelligent allies. This directly correlates with the previous point, his lack of self, his burden of being the singular strongest sorcerer. This motivation to raise strong allies who can compare to him in power was Gojo's subconscious attempt at escaping the burden of being the strongest. And so these two essential components of Gojo's character are undoubtedly going to serve an extremely important role in the incoming chapters. It is fairly evident that at this moment, the seeds Gojo has laid are nowhere near full grown, but they are growing at extreme rates. Maki, Yuta, Hakari, Yuji, all of these guys are growing in power at exponential rates, but it is very clear they are nowhere near achieving their full potential. They still have a very long way to go, and Gojo knows that very well. So for now, he believes he must take on Sukuna alone, burden the weight of responsibility single-handedly, and reclaim his position as the sole strongest in the world by defeating the King of Curses. But that mindset will be his downfall. It's very clear that Gojo is bottling a lot of emotions because of his responsibilities as the strongest, as the only one who can do what needs to be done and defeat Sukuna. No matter how many allies you have around you, you die alone. That is coming from the man himself, and what makes this sentiment particularly interesting is how it directly conflicts with the cog mentality, with Todo's philosophy, which ultimately gets him and Yuji the win against Mahito. Todo believes that sorcerers are simply part of a bigger picture, that they exist as part of something greater. The only reason they managed to defeat Mahito is because they worked together. Had Todo or Yuji tried to take him on alone, either one of them would have been dog-walked. This philosophy is also in direct opposition with Sukuna's, who preaches that flocking together is a weakness to Jogo. Sukuna's philosophy, particularly pertaining to power, is that one must disregard everything and have an overwhelming sense of self. Anything other than that isn't true strength. Gojo seems to align with Sukuna in one regard, to disregard everything as you die alone. However, the overwhelming sense of self is something Gojo lacks, and that's exactly why he'll lose. The cog mentality that many of our protagonists have adopted, to work together and fight for a greater purpose that extends beyond one's own desires. That is being heavily criticized by the narrative through Sukuna. Gojo's lack of self is what got him sealed in the prison realm. Yuki working alongside Tengen led to her downfall, and of course Yuji, the cog we spend the most time with, is constantly beat down and suffers time and time again because of his selflessness. But what happens when he embraces his innate desires, his aggression, and his overwhelming sense of self? He manages to survive against fucking Sukuna. What happens when Yuta chooses to fight for his own pleasure for the first time? He comes out on top in a 3v1. What happens when Maki loses her one real bond in her sister Mai? She gains an extreme sense of self, and with that, unbelievable power. What happens when Megumi stops thinking about how his actions will affect other people? He manages to use a domain expansion to defeat a special grade curse. What is Gege trying to say by this, by having the primary antagonist of the story be correct time and time again? I've made a video in the past titled The Most Important Arc in Jujutsu Kaisen. It's a narrative and thematic breakdown of Hidden Inventory, Gojo's flashback, and it's a fitting title because the story of Hidden Inventory is one that explores this idea better than anything else. Gojo reaches a state of enlightenment and only manages to defeat Toji because he disregards everything. He couldn't feel vengeful for Riko in that moment. He was not fighting to avenge her, but rather for nothing but himself. He gained an extreme sense of self. He was fighting to prove that he alone is the honored one, and nobody, especially not Toji Zenin, can get in the way of that. And to that end, he completely surpasses his best friend. What was once a shared position of two sorcerers became his alone, and as he fulfilled his role of being the strongest and dealing with every affair that came up, his best friend slowly sank deeper and deeper into darkness right beneath his nose. At that time, Gojo existed in his own world, in isolation from everybody else. Sure, he was maintaining a position as the strongest sorcerer, but this was something he yearned for, a position he thrived in. It only served to fuel his overwhelming sense of self. But then Geto descends into madness, and Gojo slowly reverts into what he once was. In order to prevent something like that from ever happening again, he turns to the new generation. He turns to making bonds, becomes a teacher, sowing the seeds to reshape society. He becomes that necessary cog once again, the strongest as a figurehead, which robs him of his individuality and free will. It paves the way for this idea that Gojo is just a tool bending his knee to the requirements of Jujutsu society. And this toxic mindset is not just self-inflicted by Gojo, it is perpetuated by the society around him because there is some level of truth to it. As things are right now, he needs to carry the burden of being the strongest for the sustenance of the society. And that's exactly why Gojo is trying to reshape the society by raising strong allies, specifically to escape that position he feels trapped within. And so ultimately I believe Gojo will lose in this battle because of that cog mentality. The most interesting thing about this thematic clash between the current Gojo and Sukuna is the fact that both sides have truth to them. The narrative definitely supports Sukuna's philosophy, but not all the time, which is best seen in the climactic battle of Shibuya. Yuji and Todo only succeed because of the cog mentality. And to make things even more interesting, the recent battle between Yorozu and Sukuna adds a layer of uncertainty to Sukuna in his philosophy. He clearly craves a worthy adversary, someone to put him to the test, someone powerful enough to actually challenge him, somebody like Gojo. And so this incoming battle will be addressing 220 chapters worth of narrative setup, and I believe the most logical conclusion as things are right now is for it to end in Gojo's defeat, with Gojo entrusting the other cogs in this society to finish what he has started, to create a society where people can have genuine bonds and loved ones who are more than prepared to share their suffering amongst each other. This new generation will free Gojo from his burden of being the strongest and provide him with an actual individual identity. Not a figurehead, not a tool, not just the strongest, but Satoru Gojo, the teacher, the goofball, the individual that they've always loved, the one who instilled change in a fundamentally broken society. And I think the best proof of this is in the latest chapter of the manga, where it is revealed that the higher-ups have been slaughtered, a sign of things to come, the rebuilding of Jujutsu society following this grand climactic battle. Let me know what you guys think about everything I've talked about in this video. I'll be perfectly honest, this was kinda tough to write. I tend to impose my own preconceptions of how battle shonen are typically written onto Jujutsu Kaisen, which is a mistake that really interferes with your understanding of this story. JJK is especially one of those stories that you should really try to look at in a vacuum. I don't have the most comprehensive understanding of everything Gege has written so far, and so I can see myself having made mistakes in this video, so please feel free to correct me on anything in the comment section below. But as it stands, this is how things feel like to me, and I'm very interested to see what you guys think about everything I've covered here today. These three panels side by side, coming from Gojo, Sukuna, and Kenjaku respectively, are super interesting to look at. What is Gege cooking? What kind of thematic conclusion is he working towards? For now, I think the message that Jujutsu society is fundamentally broken and needs to be rebuilt is something that holds a lot of weight, especially given the reveal in 223 about the higher-ups and how Maki massacred the Zenin clan. But who knows, time will tell where Gege plans to take things with Jujutsu Kaisen. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you stay around for more JJK content in the future.